the sunshine.
At a moment like this, and there's video, there are pictures of these individuals doing those kinds of things in the United States Capitol. It is so disgusting. One quick question before I let you go, Congressman. How worried are you about this internal FBI bulletin that CNN has obtained that says there are now, in the words of the FBI, they're tracking various threats to harm President-elect Biden ahead of the presidential inauguration, and there are threats against Vice President-elect Kamala Harris and the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. How concerned should we be about these direct threats to the physical safety of the incoming President and Vice President and the Speaker?
We should be extremely concerned. There were people who were in that Capitol building who breached the Congress, who were there to assassinate Nancy Pelosi. Make no mistake about it. They were there to hang Vice President Mike Pence. They were there to hunt down members of the United States House of Representatives and Senators because the president unleashed them with a big lie that this election had been stolen from him and that the presidency didn't belong to Joe Biden and the vice presidency to Kamala Harris. And many of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle perpetrated and facilitated that lie. I'm hopeful, and we're getting ready to have a security briefing in a few minutes, that all available law enforcement entities are all hands on deck with respect to protection of incoming President Joe Biden, the Vice President, the Speaker, the Senate Majority Leader, every member of Congress, the staff that's there, and protecting the health and safety and well-being of the American people. We cannot allow these domestic terrorists and these enemy combatants to win. That's why we went back to the Capitol on January 6th to complete our work and certify the election of Joe Biden. That's why we will be there on January 20th to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. But we are going to have to deal with these violent white supremacist entities in the most decisive way possible moving forward.
I drove around Capitol Hill today in my car just to see what was going on, not just the fencing and the barriers that have been built up, but the military personnel who have been deployed to protect the U.S. Capitol, and there are now reports that maybe as many as 15,000 National Guard troops are on the way to Washington to help protect all of you and everybody else in the days leading up to the inauguration. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, be careful up there. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Wolf.
Just ahead, an outdoor inauguration amid growing threats of armed protest. President-elect Biden is now weighing in on that. And we'll also talk about this disturbing new FBI bulletin with the Bureau's former Deputy Director, Andrew McCabe. Lots going on. We'll be right back.
Tonight, Democrats have the votes to impeach President Trump for a second time, as the FBI warns there could be armed attacks in all 50 states if the president is removed before the end of his term. New video tonight shows just how violent the assault on the Capitol was, as the FBI looks through tens of thousands of photos and videos and asks for the public's help finding this man. Breaking news, the Capitol Police under investigation. 2 officers suspended, one for taking selfies, the other for allegedly directing the mob. Plus, the first on-camera interview with the former Capitol Police chief. He says he repeatedly asked the Pentagon for backup.
They were more concerned with the optics.
Guarding the inauguration, up to 15,000 National Guard troops deployed to D.C. as the Secret Service prepares to take over security a week early. Business backlash. Marriott, American Express, and others suspend political donations. The PGA moves its championship out of a Trump golf course. Social media blackout. The president forced off Twitter and Facebook and other major platforms. The cries of censorship by conservatives. New year, new COVID records. 22,000 deaths in the first week of 2021. As the president-elect gets his second vaccine shot, fairgrounds, baseball stadiums, and closed department stores become mass vaccination centers. Rare snow day. Record snow in Texas knocks out power and brings a winter wonderland to the south. And a story of heroism, how an officer's quick thinking likely saved lives.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We are going to begin with breaking news because there's a lot of it tonight. As we come on the air, the FBI has issued an urgent law enforcement bulletin saying groups are planning armed protests at the U.S. Capitol and at state capitals ahead of President-elect Biden's inauguration. The FBI says there are also threats against Mr. Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, along with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Also this, Chad Wolf, the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, says he's resigning just hours after he stepped up security in Washington, putting the Secret Service in charge of a national security, special security event a week ahead of Mr. Biden's swearing in. Now, the Washington Monument has already closed, and the Park Service says it may shut down other areas of D.C. in the coming days. And we're just learning that at least 2 Capitol police officers have been suspended, accused of joining in with the rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol last week, including leading them through the halls of the building. Well, tonight on Capitol Hill, Democrats have introduced an article of impeachment against the president, accusing him of inciting last week's attack. And there is increasing pressure for Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. So we've got a lot of new reporting tonight. We've got our correspondent standing by.
Urged supporters to march to the Capitol, saying you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to be strong, saying he'd be right there with them, watching back from the White House. And then what came after? And this is difficult to watch. The angry crowd surging forward, overpowering police, and one man can actually be seen tossing a fire extinguisher, striking several officers in the head. Rioters attacking police officers guarding a door, dragging one officer down the stairs, a man striking him over and over with a pole, carrying the American flag. Inside, lawmakers seen through a window being led to safety, a man seen smashing through that window with his fist. Now the nationwide manhunt, some 40,000 tips, dozens already under arrest. And the FBI out tonight with a sobering warning that armed protests are now being planned in all 50 state capitals and in the nation's capital this weekend and right through the inauguration next week. A group calling for the storming of government buildings and an uprising if the president is removed from office. There are threats tonight against the president-elect Joe Biden and the vice president-elect Kamala Harris too. The president-elect was asked today, does he feel safe being sworn in outside the Capitol? He said yes. There is a lot to unpack tonight, and we're going to begin here with ABC's Mary Bruce, leading us off from Washington.
Tonight calls for accountability as the horror of the siege on the Capitol comes into clear view. Rioters seen beating an officer with an American flag. President Trump's supporters trying to hunt down his own vice president after he refused to overturn the results of the election, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." House Democrats are now moving quickly to try and remove Trump from office, introducing a single article of impeachment, charging the president with incitement of insurrection for inciting violence against the government of the United States by urging his followers to march on the Capitol.
Well, sadly, the person who's running the executive branch is a deranged, unhinged, dangerous president of the United States.
The House Speaker detailing to 60 Minutes how her staffers hid, horrified, as the mob overtook her offices.
The staff went under the table, barricaded the door, turned out the lights, and were silent in the dark
under the table
for 2.5 hours.
Wow. 60 Minutes obtaining this audio of what her staffers heard, the president's supporters trying to bang down the door. The speaker is now pressuring Pence to act first, urging the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment and immediately remove Trump from office. It seems highly unlikely, but Pence notably hasn't publicly rejected the idea. The vice president seen at the White House today, but we're told he and Trump haven't spoken since the riot. Several members of the president's party, like Senator Pat Toomey, say Trump should resign.
I do think the president committed impeachable offenses.
Some of the president's top allies are also turning on him.
You know, so you think it was an impeachable offense?
Before Jordan. Oh, sure. Yeah. If inciting to insurrection isn't, then I don't really know what is.
Tonight, prominent freshman Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn, who attended the rally with the president, said it was a, quote, major mistake for Trump to tell the crowd to head to the Capitol and that he'd be there with them.
Yeah, he never should have directed that crowd towards the Capitol building because they, just the there was a bad outcome was destined at that point.
But even after the riot, Cawthorn and more than 100 House Republicans stood by the president and voted to overturn the will of the voters. And tonight, the vast majority of congressional Republicans aren't saying one way or another if Trump should go.
My personal view is that the president touched the hot stove on Wednesday and is unlikely to touch it again.
As for the president, he's been holed up in the White House, silent since Twitter permanently kicked him off the site due to the risk of further incitement of violence. But breaking her silence today, the First Lady, Melania Trump, says she was disappointed and disheartened by the insurrection, but that she's been treated unfairly, saying it's shameful that surrounding these tragic events, there has been salacious gossip, unwarranted personal attacks, and false, misleading accusations on me. It's unclear what she's talking about. Sunday, Trump finally lowered the flags to half-staff at the White House in honor of Officer Brian Sicknick, who was injured in the chaos and later died. Pelosi, Pence, and President-elect Joe Biden have all spoken with the officer's family, but not the president. He still hasn't said a word about Officer Sicknick's death.
All right, so let's get right to Mary. She's up on the Hill again tonight. Mary, Democrats are now preparing for an impeachment vote on Wednesday.
To the Capitol.
President Trump, banned from Twitter, has not expressed remorse over the uprising. In fact, he presented a Medal of Freedom today to Congressman Jim Jordan, who helped lead the charge last week to contest the election without proof of widespread fraud.
Americans instinctively know there was something wrong with this election.
Today, Airbnb joined the growing list of companies vowing to withhold support from Republicans who voted against the certification of the presidential election results. Hallmark even asked two senators to refund its donations. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley is now facing calls to resign in his hometown paper and on the streets of St. Louis.
I would like a person to lose power when he misuses power.
The organizers of the PGA Championship have pulled out of plans to host the tournament at President Trump's Bedminster Golf Club next year. House Democrats say if they impeach him this week, they intend to send the article to the Senate right away, meaning a trial could get underway just as President-elect Biden is taking office.
Ready.
Mr. Biden said today he's been discussing a workaround with congressional leaders.
The question is whether or not you can bifurcate this. Can you go half day on dealing with the impeachment and half day getting my people nominated and confirmed in the Senate?
New Jersey Democrat Bonnie Watson Coleman announced today that she tested positive after sheltering with several colleagues who refused to wear masks. Video from last week shows a group of House Republicans rejecting masks while they were being held in close quarters for hours with nowhere to go. Tonight, White House sources say the PGA decision infuriated Mr. Trump and that he and Vice President Pence still haven't spoken since last Wednesday. The big question now, how many of their fellow Republicans will vote in favor of the 25th Amendment or impeachment, or both? Nora? Makes the next couple days very interesting. Nancy Cordes, thank you. Now to next week's inauguration, thousands of National Guard troops have been activated, and tonight the Secret Service is preparing to step up security a full week ahead of the event, which was already being scaled back because of the coronavirus. We get more now from CBS's Nicole Killian.
With 9 days until the inauguration, a security surge underway in the nation's capital.
If I'm scared of anything, it's for our democracy.
Washington's mayor urged Americans to stay home on Inauguration Day as the Department of Homeland Security announced the city would go into a high-security lockdown days ahead of schedule. The Washington Monument was shut down due to credible threats to visitors, and the Army is planning to activate up to 15,000 National Guard troops by January 20th. Despite scores of rioters swarming the inaugural platform,
Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick have been looking into reports that he may have been hit with a fire extinguisher, but unclear if it is Sicknick in the video. And this new and horrifying video, watch the man in the white hat and backpack pull an officer to the ground as the rioters drag him by the legs, pummeling him with the poles carrying American flags. Tonight, FBI field officers in all 50 states combing through videos and images, along with some 45,000 tips. A senior official telling ABC News the mob had leadership, communications equipment, and the expertise of former military officers like Larry Brock, who police say is seen here in the Capitol holding white flex cuffs. The Texas-based Air Force officer and combat veteran turned in by his ex-wife, according to an FBI affidavit. And Eric Munchell, a Tennessee bartender, also arrested. Law enforcement officials saying Munchell appears to be the man here, also carrying plastic restraints, prompting questions about whether the mob intended to take hostages. But it seems clear what the intent was here, as rioters smashed through the glass to gain entrance to where House members were huddled. Ashley Babbitt, another Air Force veteran, seen climbing up through the smashed window. And from the other side, an officer fires a shot, killing Babbitt. One of 5 dead.
That's when we come back here at 5:30.
After watching that video of his officer being crushed by rioters.
It makes me sick to my stomach to see that video, and that officer, obviously, he was afraid for his life.
And this officer now being praised for his quick thinking. The Washington Post reporting the officer deliberately led the mob away from the Senate chamber after noticing the door to the chamber was open. The officer using himself as a decoy as the crowd followed and chased him. Tonight, the man who police say led that mob, Doug Jensen, now in custody. As for those officers who were suspended, Senator Tim Ryan, who heads the subcommittee charged with Capitol Police funding, says one officer was seen taking a selfie with a rioter and another put on a MAGA hat and was allegedly giving directions to rioters. Ryan also said 10 to 15 additional officers are being investigated. David?
All right, more to come on that, Martha. Thank you. And now to that urgent FBI warning tonight about armed protests now being planned in all 50 U.S. state capitals and the U.S. Capitol too, before and right up through the inauguration. And the group now threatening to attack federal, state, and local office buildings if President Trump is removed from office. Here's our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, tonight.
After those horrifying images at the Capitol, federal authorities warning of more potential uprisings. The FBI bulletin alerting law enforcement across the country that armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals through Inauguration Day. Intelligence pointing to an unnamed armed group calling for the storming of government buildings and courthouses if President Trump is removed before January 20th. The FBI saying the group is also planning attacks here in D.C. the day of Biden's inauguration. Threats also identified against Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Nancy Pelosi.
If I'm scared of anything, it's for our democracy because we have a very extreme factions in our country that are armed and dangerous.
Dakota News Now. Weekday mornings from 5 to 7. It's news when you want it. Dakota.
All crimes that may have been committed while I served as president, that has no force in effect and is not even necessarily ripe for adjudication until such time as someone in the Justice Department decides to bring a charge against Donald Trump. And if and when that charge was brought, presumably Donald Trump and his lawyers would stand up and say, we've got this piece of paper that purports to be a self-pardon, and that's our defense, and the judge would figure that out. It's interesting that the Attorney General has made this comment. I think what will naturally happen in the next administration, if it hasn't already, is we might get further guidance in the form of an Office of Legal Counsel opinion within the Justice Department, setting out at some greater length the department's view and opinion of whether or not a self-pardon is appropriate, which may have some weight and carry some force if a judge in the future has to deal with the situation I described.
North of Los Angeles, the family of Maria Arrieta got to say goodbye once she had already passed.
It's a very helpless feeling, isn't it?
Maria left behind 4 children and 20 grandchildren.
It hurts because now we're living the pain. It could be your mom. This time it was our mom.
And it's a tragic warning tonight. This is Dodger Stadium, said to be the largest testing site in the country. It's being turned into a vaccination hub this week, where they're hoping to give doses to 12,000 people a day. Nora.
Jonathan Vigliotti, thank you. And there's still much more news ahead here on tonight's CBS Evening News. New details in the investigation into a plane crash this weekend that killed dozens.
And then get into a leadership skill like being...
Decide what we do with the 139 outvoted with the terrorists after the attack.
So you're advocating the possible expulsion of some of those Republican members of Congress?
Yeah, I'm advocating the expulsion, absolutely, of the two ringleaders, Cruz and Hawley, and the body that I sit in. The House should do it, whatever they think best. But then I think, what do we do with those other 6 senators that voted with the terrorists after the attack, after House members' lives were saved by courageous police, after the police officer you talked about kept people out of the Senate chamber, after we had for 5 hours been quarantined or kept in a safe room in the Hart Building, they come back and they still sided with the terrorists who had just attacked our country. So we need to figure what do we do with those senators also. But the first thing is impeachment. The first thing is expulsion of the 2 senators and impeachment. I don't particularly care the order. And there needs to be accountability, without a question.
Speaker Pelosi has detailed how this went. Take a listen.
The staff went under the table, barricaded the door, turned out the lights, and were silent in the dark.
Under the table?
Under the table for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
During which time they listened to the invaders banging on that door, as you can hear on a recording from one of the staffers' phones.
The evidence that's pouring in suggests this horrific attack could have been far, far worse. Do you believe in some sense that it also may be working if there are Republican senators or others who are afraid of these people who are, as advertised, in their base?
I'm not clear what you mean working. Say what you mean again, Arnie.
Do you think, sure, Senator, do you think that people like Senator Graham, who was mobbed at the airport, people like Senator Cruz, they may have played with fire, but are they now afraid of political blowback or violence from these individuals if they reside more on the right and more on the Republican MAGA side than anywhere else? Are they intimidated?
I heard when the 75 senators were confined in a room with about 75 staff people, Lindsey Graham with his mask off started screaming at one of the officers, I think it was one of the captains, saying, "How come you didn't protect us if you're doing your job?" This is the same Lindsey Graham that for 5 years, or for 4 years, he didn't do it at the beginning, defended and argued for and encouraged and aided and abetted this president in all of his followers, who were perhaps as extreme.
Senator, while you were still in the emergency of it, you saw Senator Graham yelling or berating an officer. I mean, what was he getting at? What can you tell us about that? Do you think he was wrong to do that?
Yeah, I've not said this publicly yet, but when I hear Graham and these others say these things, and he was screaming at an officer, he had his mask off, screaming at his officer from 5 feet away. I was maybe 10 feet on the other side. And the officer the police didn't do enough to protect us. The same Lindsey Graham that aided and abetted the same number of senators, then a number of them, Lindsey wasn't one of them, but they came back and still sided with these terrorists after the attack on our Capitol. So I don't know what they've learned, but I know what we've learned, and we need to make all of them accountable. We also need every Republican senator has to stand up and say, this was a fair election, there was no fraud, Joe Biden is legitimate. Because when I watch senators speak, after all this happened, before and after, many of them said, yeah, I recognize Biden's president, but there was fraud. And this happened 20 years ago and 15 years ago when the Democrats did it. No, it didn't. It's total false equivalency. There was no fraud. If we're ever going to fight our way back as a country, we need to make Trump and Giuliani and all the insiders accountable. We need to make senators and members of Congress accountable, and then other senators who may not have been quite as guilty in aiding and abetting Trump, not quite, need to stand up and say this was a legitimate election. That's how we're going to govern next year. That's what we need as a country.
Senator Brown, thank you for your time. You made a little news there, sharing some of that, and appreciate you being with us. We'll be right back.
Experience boost.
Said there is this is most hurting Joe Biden. We don't have any of his national security staff or nominees confirmed yet. That's unprecedented, and the Senate simply doesn't have time to do both of these. So it would be better if the vice president or the president-elect came out and told his party to stand down.
But in the same time, we have the acting Homeland Security Secretary stepping down, saying it was warranted by the actions of the past few days. I mean, it's going to be a bumpy ride on January 20th.
Well, he also said, didn't he, Brett, that because it had been, the court had ruled that he was not legally in office because of the manner of his appointment as acting, that was one of the reasons, too. But look, these people are leaving this administration. This administration is ending. It's days away, as you point out, from being completely gone. So these steps are not surprising, and it illustrates how little is left of the Trump administration and the Trump presidency. So it suggests to me, at least, how sort of unnecessary the act of impeaching would be, although, you know, a lot of people think, you know, this guy did this stuff, it was terrible, it was insurrection and all the rest of it. But as has been amply pointed out here, this steps all over the moment at which Joe Biden, the healer and the new president, is intended to step forward and convey his message of togetherness and unity to the American people on the, you know, on the day of his inauguration, and, you know, to get done the cabinet appointments that he's hoping swiftly to complete as he starts his administration.
Jeff, you know, there's this trip tomorrow to the border, and it's in a town called Alamo. That was planned beforehand, but a lot of people looking at this and saying, what will the final days of this administration look like? There's a lot of stories about aides trying to focus on the accomplishments of the past 4 years.
Yes, I've reported that too, that the president's staff are encouraging him to discuss and focus on his legacy, the last remaining days of governing, and to talk about his accomplishments. But in that same breath, I've spoken to White House officials who say it's tone deaf to be trying to do any of that in the wake of what happened at the Capitol. And so there is, I mean, one White House official telling me a few days ago that nobody cares at all. And that, I think, was a reflection both on some people at the White House and people elsewhere in the country. I don't think that is true for everyone. Certainly there are people here at this White House who are deeply saddened and really upset about what happened on Wednesday, because they feel, not only because, but at least partially because they feel it's overshadowing what they believe should be a strong legacy from this president.
Yeah, I think that's a common refrain from Trump supporters I've talked to, is sadness. Panel, thank you very much. We'll cover it all. When we come back, a disco party.
Oil doesn't just help me get to retirement, they're with me all the way.
This portion, some real fun.
We'll see you at 6:30 on KSFY.
Right after Dakota News.
Take us 14 weeks just to receive enough dosages for those currently eligible. Now, we will schedule appointments for vaccines weeks into the future. We would rather have people signed up and awaiting the vaccine than have the vaccine awaiting people.
Necklace and bring it to you at the...
He really became in love with books. He became so fond of books.
As your hour-by-hour forecast, getting you ready for whatever the weather might bring. Dakota News Now, weekday mornings.
So members...
Vcr.com.
Age-related macular degeneration.
Let's go through our evening planners here. First of all, for Sioux Falls is mainly clear, 36 degrees, and will be clear to partly cloudy heading through the evening, falling into the 20s by 8, and then staying there heading to the evening and overnight hours. We're not going to fall too much after midnight. For Aberdeen, beautiful, a few scattered clouds off in the distance. Clear to partly cloudy, 32 now. Will fall into the low 20s later on this evening. And in Pierre, there's no...
Trulicity if you're allergic to it.
30.
So stop.
80s.
I'm on TV!
For 1 year. They'll be trained to facilitate a statewide coordinated vaccination operation and do it safely and quickly.
To me, that means being the place.
Dual climate control. Hey.
We're hoping things will pick up by. Really have to earn it. Only 3 of 10 cars.
This would help. Get a strategy gut.
It's time for a revolution.
Welcome to Delicious.
At iMart Express,
Nicorette knows quitting smoking is freaking hard.
Tell you what, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'll let you try the chunk, honey.
They have been telling us all night they're going to tell us something in 10 minutes. That was 2 hours ago.
They made entry, and they found
more needs. As we close the program today, I want to remind you, as I do in every program, Psalm 122.
on just soothing sensitive skin? Exactly, Jen.
Bobapedic means comfort.
My family to yours, have a healthy, happy, and safe New Year.
The things I've chosen.
A final note tonight, the powerful images honoring the U.S. Capitol Police officer Brian Sicknick, who was killed in the line of duty defending the Capitol. His funeral set police officers lining the streets, saluting the hearse. The Capitol in the distance, his casket visible inside the hearse, the American flag draped over it. The officer's family saying he loved his job, adding, "If any good comes out of my son's death, I just hope that it stops the lunacy that's been going on in this country." Tonight, that officer honored by his fellow officers and by the country. I'm David Muir. Thanks for watching. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Good night.
And meteorologist Tyler Roney will.
This news for the developments in the assault on the Capitol and the likely impeachment of President Trump. And if you can't watch us live, don't forget to set your DVR so you can watch us later. That is tonight's edition of the CBS Evening News. I'm Nora O'Donnell in the nation's capital. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Good night.
Maybe it's time to make the switch. Eric and Vanessa have the news you need to start your day off right. And Eric has your hour-by-hour forecast, getting you ready for whatever the weather might bring. Dakota News Now. Weekday mornings from 5 to 7. It's news when you want it.
Anyone can struggle with addiction. You may feel isolated, locked.
Our citizens supported him on. Those have been good. We just wish he would have quit tweeting a long time ago.
Before members of the South Dakota Retailers Association, the senator answered questions about all things D.C. He spoke to the chance's progressive policy goals, like an expanded Supreme Court, have before a Democrat-controlled government.
I know that they have suggested that they would actually come in and that they would pack the court. I don't think President Biden seriously wants to do that.
Tonight, the push to impeach President Trump a historic second time gaining momentum. House Democrats introducing one article of impeachment against the president for inciting the deadly insurrection at the Capitol. Nancy Pelosi giving Vice President Pence a 24-hour ultimatum to invoke the 25th Amendment. Will any Republicans join the effort, and could the president be impeached even after he leaves office in 9 days? The manhunt for the rioters, at least 90 arrests, and just in, 2 Capitol police officers suspended for their actions. The FBI asking for the public's help to identify this man carrying a Confederate flag during the attack. And the new FBI warning, all 50 states told to be on alert for armed protests at their state capitals. D.C. bracing for more potential violence and growing concerns about the safety of Joe Biden's inauguration. What's being done to secure it? The much-feared post-holiday COVID surge is here. More than half the states reporting a rise as the U.S. surpasses 375,000 deaths. And what's being done to ramp up vaccinations as the rollout remains frustratingly slow? And the rush to return those unwanted holiday gifts. Why some companies are saying, go ahead and keep them.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Each video emerging from Wednesday's attack on the Capitol seems more horrifying than the one before. And with the parade of images grows a movement in Congress tonight. It's led by Democrats to hold President Trump accountable for his incendiary call to action just before the assault. This evening, the ultimatum, the call on Vice President Pence to remove the president by way of the 25th Amendment or for the president to face another impeachment. America at a dizzying crossroad tonight, and it's where we start with Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander.
House Democrats now poised to issue a blunt ultimatum to Vice President Pence tomorrow, invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump by Wednesday, or they'll make the president the first ever to be impeached twice.
I think every day he's in office, he remains a real and present danger to the country.
Pence, seen late today arriving at the White House, is said to oppose implementing the 25th Amendment. So Democrats today introducing a single article of impeachment, accusing President Trump of, quote, inciting violence against the government of the United States. The charge right now reads in part, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He therefore betrayed his trust as president.
We have to stand up to this man who incited a violent riot at our nation's capital. It was a massive humiliation to our nation. It had a lot of people die.
Already more than 210 House Democrats back impeachment, but there's no broad support among Republicans. In the Senate, Democrats would need 17 Republicans to join them to convict and remove the president. But so far, only one frequent Trump critic, Ben Sasse, says he would consider impeachment. Two others say President Trump should step down.
Well, I think the best way for our country, Chuck, is for the president to resign and go away as soon as possible.
Many Republicans warn a partisan impeachment would further divide Americans.
The Democrats are going to try to remove the president from office just 7 days before he's set to leave anyway. I do not see how that unifies the country.
President Trump out of sight again today, but in the wake of last week's riots, the PGA announced its canceled plans to hold the 2022 PGA Championship at President Trump's Bedminster, New Jersey Golf Club. First Lady Melania Trump breaking her silence, expressing her condolences to the families of those who died and calling for calm. Our nation must heal in a civil manner, she writes. Violence is never acceptable. A potential Senate trial to remove President Trump would likely happen after he's already gone from office. But President-elect Biden tonight insists it would not interrupt his first 100 days.
Can you go half day on dealing with the impeachment and half day getting my people nominated and confirmed in the Senate? So that's my hope and expectation.
And late tonight, Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf abruptly announced that he is stepping down, but Wolf did not cite last week's riots in his resignation message. Lester.
All right, Peter, thank you. And that leads us to our Capitol Hill correspondent, Casey Hunt. Casey, any indication if Republicans will join Democrats in pushing for impeachment?
Lester, late tonight on a conference call, top House Republican Kevin McCarthy said for the first time that President Trump does bear some responsibility for the Capitol riot and didn't rule out censuring the president. But so far, one Republican congressman has said publicly he's thinking about going further and voting for impeachment. If others join him, that could lead to more support for convicting President Trump in the Senate, where behind the scenes, Republicans are even more furious after new video showed just how much danger they were in. Lester.
All right, Casey Hunt tonight, thanks. And federal prosecutors are working to identify potentially hundreds of suspects in last week's attack. Also tonight, Capitol police officers suspended for their actions during the riot. Tom Costello has late details.
Tonight, a dramatic development. 2 Capitol police officers suspended for their roles in last week's insurrection. Some officers have been seen taking selfies with rioters or letting them through.
I know that there were 2 people suspended. One was the selfie officer, and another was an officer who had to put a MAGA hat on and started directing some people around.
Terrorism analysts say Wednesday's riot leaders may have fully intended to capture or harm members of Congress, including Speaker Pelosi, even Vice President Pence. Among the evidence, threatening online posts, weapons, explosives, the tactical gear some rioters were wearing, and those zip ties often used as handcuffs. The FBI says it's making arrests as it works through tens of thousands of tips. and it's looking for this man, seen carrying a Confederate flag through the Capitol.
Well, it's quite clear that the events of last week, that we have within the United States a form of domestic terrorism that is focused on the overthrow of our government, is focused on the idea of chaos.
NBC News has reported that both the NYPD and the FBI had warned Capitol Police days before the attack that right-wing extremists were planning something big. But the Capitol Police Chief, Stephen Sund, who has resigned under pressure, says he requested National Guard troops to stand by days in advance, but his request was turned down by his bosses, the sergeants at arms in the House and the Senate. Sund told the Washington Post that at 2:26 p.m., as the attack was underway, he pleaded with the Pentagon for help, saying, "I'm making an urgent, immediate request for National Guard assistance. I've got to get boots on the ground." But he says he was rebuffed by a Pentagon general out of concern it would not look good to have Guard troops at the Capitol. Today, though, that general at the Pentagon said neither I nor anyone else from DOD denied the deployment of requested personnel. The approval to deploy was received approximately 40 minutes after the call initiated. Guard troops arrived at 5:40 p.m., more than 3 hours after the initial request.
There are ways to secure the perimeter of the U.S. Capitol. We do this for an inauguration. We do this for a State of the Union address. We do this for a UN General Assembly every year. This could have been avoided if it had been anticipated.
Also tonight, the Republican State Attorneys General Association is under fire after a fundraising arm sent out robocalls before last week's march, calling for the march to the Capitol.
At 1 o'clock p.m., we will march to the Capitol building and call on Congress to stop this deal.
Executive Director Adam Piper first blamed staff for the call. Today, he resigned.
Tom, let me ask you this. I want to go back to those suspended Capitol police officers. What else do we know there?
Yeah, Congressman Tim Ryan, who oversees the committee that oversees that particular police department, says that we know that other officers are under investigation. And also, police departments around the country are looking at how their officers acted if they came here to the rally. Were they involved in this riot? Lester?
All right, Tom Costello on Capitol Hill. Thanks. A House Democrat who was caught in the riot, Bonnie Watson Coleman of New Jersey, says she has tested positive for COVID-19 and thinks she got it sheltering with members of Congress who refuse to wear masks. With the COVID pandemic exploding, getting people vaccinated continues to be a major challenge as more states open mass vaccination sites. Stephanie Goss tells us more.
In San Antonio,
the big question has been, where is Chris Wray been? He hasn't done any kind of public statement before the cameras. He's issued a paper statement. So has the acting attorney general, and we are still waiting to hear whether or not they're going to address the public. Obviously, as you mentioned, the FBI is concerned about these protests, not only here in Washington surrounding the inauguration. There's another one having to do with Second Amendment on the 17th. And if the Democrats go through with trying to remove the president before then, you can bet that the FBI believes that some of his supporters will turn out again. And the concern is for a repeat of what happened. And one of the interesting things about issuing this bulletin is that none of this stuff happened before the Wednesday rally, Aaron. There were some regional bulletins that were put out. A lot of this stuff is stuff from off the internet. This is stuff that they're talking about on Parler and on Twitter. And the FBI knew that some people who might be violent might be attending the Trump rally. And the question is, why wasn't more done by the Capitol Police to protect the building before the mobs came in?
From oil changes to engine changes,
Amy Geyer contributes a lot of her success at Iroquois High School to her home life.
My parents encourage me a lot to be involved in extracurriculars and also keep your grades up. I have a twin sister and we do everything together. We help each other with our homework and we push each other to be better all the time.
Geyer stays very busy in school. Besides athletics and cheerleading, the 3.95 student is also in drama and all-state chorus, to name a few. Her involvement in HOSA, the Future Health Professionals Group, has brought her some of the best memories.
We've been to the state, we won state, and we went to the International Leadership Conference. every year since I was a freshman, and we actually won first place my freshman.
To say the president is also not speaking to the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy or Senate Majority Leader, outgoing Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I was speaking to a source today and I said, well, isn't the functioning of government important? Don't these people need to speak to each other? And that person said to me, why would they need to speak? Everyone just wants to see President Trump gone. So that's President Trump's, that's the state of play here when it comes to the government. The other thing is the president, as you noted, he's kicked off Twitter, he's kicked off Facebook. He also is starting to lose business. The PGA National Tour says that they're not going to have their big golf tournament anymore at the Trump New Jersey hotel, and as a result, the president has apparently been fuming particularly about that. The other thing to note is that there are real questions about when the president is going to speak to the American people. There was some talk today that the president might come out to the briefing room. That didn't happen. He's going to be going to Texas tomorrow. The White House says it's really a victory lap so that he can talk about the 400 miles of border wall that were constructed, something that they say is a promise kept on his behalf. As opposed to the vice president, I'm told, is trying to do work and trying to stay as business as possible. He held a meeting with governors today. He's also going to be focused on COVID-19 and also these other things that are really still pressing issues in the United States.
And Lisa, back to you. I understand you're learning more details about what exactly happened last Wednesday to members of Congress, to journalists, to police.
That's right. I spoke to many members today. I was on the Hill. It was a difficult day on Capitol Hill, and I think it was a difficult and long weekend. I'll focus on police. I know we're short on time. We've learned over this weekend that a second Capitol Police officer who was there in the riots died. This one, Howard Liebengood, died by suicide. He's someone that I knew and other reporters knew. Very good guy, fan of the Tottenham Hotspurs, and it's a real loss. And I think that is kind of speaks to the real challenge for Capitol Police officers. I also want to say that I know these officers have been working 16-hour shifts. None of them have gotten time off since the riot. Some of them 12-hour shifts now, just started today. I spoke to one officer. Both of the spouses in that family are officers, and they've had to ask their neighbors to help bring dinner to their children because they've been working such long hours. Also getting details about the riots. We should be learning more over the next few days about what happened exactly.
And just finally, quickly, back to you, Yamiche, on reporting you've done about how all this is affecting President-elect Biden.
President-elect Biden wants to see President Trump held accountable, but he doesn't want to see his legislative agenda derailed. So there are talks now that President-elect Biden has said he's talking to members of Congress to try to bifurcate the impeachment process so that half a day would be spent on impeachment, half a day spent on confirming his cabinet secretaries, and time spent on trying to pass that COVID relief bill that Joe Biden wants to pass as soon as he gets into office.
All right, Yamiche Alcindor, Lisa Desjardins, following it all. Thank you both.
Together, we are. A growing number of social media companies banning President Trump and cracking down on far-right extremists as they migrate to darker corners of the internet. Here's Jolene Kent.
Tonight, pressure is mounting on social media companies to stop plans for more violence from spreading. More than a dozen companies already blocking or restricting President Trump on their platforms.
This shows that even a president is not above the policies we have.
On Facebook, he's banned till further notice.
The inauguration is coming. We are focused on doing everything we can to protect our services, and that ban stays and is indefinite to make sure we get through this.
Twitter permanently shutting down his account. The new challenge, tracking extremists on the move online.
What we see is people retreating to more private spaces and organizing there.
What kind of calls for violence are you seeing right now online?
A lot of calls for a sort of January 6th do-over. People saying go to your state capitals and arrest people or overthrow the government.
Meantime, Parler, an alternative social media platform that's popular among conservatives and far-right extremists, removed from Apple and Google's app stores and no longer hosted by Amazon Web Services, amid accusations it allowed the incitement of violence. Parler now suing Amazon, saying we do not condone or accept violence on our platform and we never will. Some big tech companies also taking another step, Facebook and Microsoft among at least a dozen major corporations, suspending their political contributions too. Jolene Kent, NBC News.
In just 60 seconds, the new FBI warning on armed protests around the country ahead of next week's inauguration.
The weekend, upper 30s for highs in Pierre and a Rapid City. Rain mixing with or changing into snow, but fierce winds. We can see some 60-mile-an-hour gusts on Thursday in Rapid City.
All right, thanks, Jay. Still to come, as more people reschedule their elective surgeries, doctors are also reminding patients to go through physical therapy. That story is up next.
You taught me to... Fast money back guarantee. Dude, your new home off
is now covered by Medicare. Ask your doctor for a prescription.
It's us. Now it's us. It is us, my neighbor, someone down the street, someone in the same state who's looking at my country and saying, I'd like to use violence to threaten the Congress of the United States and to say that I don't respect the law of this country. It was them 20 years ago. It's us now. And for me, that's, especially living with young people in this household, that's more concerning. It's us.
Final word, David.
Well, I think it is concerning. We've also been here before domestically. You know, in the 90s, it wasn't at this level, but there was a lot of internal division, a lot of anger and rancor directed toward the federal government. There was the Oklahoma City bombing, which was a heinous act of domestic terror. So we have been here before, and people need to be watchful. But I also want to sound a note of optimism in the strength of our institutions, in the strength of our political system, and in each other, that we're strong enough to withstand this and put up some guardrails against the excesses that we've already seen.
Thank you.
Erin,
Go ahead, Abby. Yes.
You know, I do think it's important what happens from here. One of the things Congress is dealing with is what is the message that's going to be sent. It's not just about the partisan in the rank and file. It's about what our leaders do and what the role of the president is. And so I think that that is the big question that hangs over the situation. We've never had a president who's done this before, and that's what makes this very different.
Yeah. Thank you all very much. And we do have more breaking news on the impeachment vote. We now know it is set for Wednesday in the House, as Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is looking at using a rare technique that would basically reconvene the Senate, and so that they could hold the formal impeachment trial, right, to convict before President Trump leaves office in 9 days. Manu Raju is out front on Capitol Hill. Manu, that obviously would be very significant because the House is barreling towards an impeachment vote. But everyone has sort of said, well, if you do that, then you got to wait until Biden takes office, and then the Senate has to decide when Schumer's in the majority. So what could happen here that would get that done before Inauguration Day?
Well, they would need support from Mitch McConnell, the current Senate Majority Leader, but McConnell is not indicating that he would get behind an effort for a quick trial. So as a result, we're very likely looking at a trial that would begin when Joe Biden becomes president for the outgoing and former president, Donald Trump. At that point, the Senate would have to vote to convict by a 2/3 majority Donald Trump, and if they were successful in voting, they also could prevent him from holding office ever again. But this is moving very quickly in the House. There is expected to be a vote on Wednesday to impeach Donald Trump on the charge of inciting an insurrection. Democrats believe that they have the votes. They are confident tonight that they do. They believe they'll get at least some Republicans to be on board. But most Republicans are opposed to this idea, including Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader, who just had a conference call with his colleagues and said that he prefers other approaches, including a bipartisan commission to study what went wrong. But Aaron, McCarthy did acknowledge on this conference call that he spoke with President Trump, and Trump himself acknowledged that he bore some of the blame for the violent riots here that killed 5 people, including that one U.S. Capitol Police officer. We have not heard the president say that publicly, but privately he acknowledged that to Kevin McCarthy, who just revealed that to his members. But nevertheless, impeachment for the most part will mostly be Democrats pushing forward. We'll see if any Republicans get behind it as well.
Right, and of course, publicly addressing the nation and all this at the beginning would have been the right thing to do, but that isn't what he did as he continued to fan the flames during that day and after. Thank you, Manu. All right, so for more than Democrats thinking in the House, since that's...
You know what this
It's not a good thing. It's hard on your mental health as well as your physical health. So
We're ready to help you guys out when they need it.
With Healthbeat, I'm Sophie Heineman.
To find out the specific precautions being taken at your facility, call your provider.
Del Rapids St. Mary's standout rewrote the school's record book Friday nights. We'll have that story next in sports.
Aaron, and our focus remains on the dire threat that this president poses to our
on A&E.
each hour, each minute that he remains in the White House and as commander-in-chief. So we are going to move forward. We will ask once again
about that documentary and about racial issues a lot over the recent years. Shelby, thank you so much for being here tonight. You know, when you listen to Alex's report and you hear about all of those companies canceling the president in many ways, what goes through your mind tonight?
That cancellation has become an exercise of moral power. It is if someone disagrees and they have a different politics. This is not something you engage in argument. It's something that you are so morally above that you obliterate. You just eliminate it, and you don't have to argue. You can get credit for all sorts of virtuous sentiments when all you've done really is run away from an issue. And so it's a sad thing to see. It cuts off. It undermines our democracy, which is based on debate and cross-examination and so forth and evidence. My film, one you mentioned, What Killed Michael Brown, was canceled by Amazon. We got a very nasty letter, one that wasn't just official, but that was actually, there was a tone of moral outrage that they were going to not accept our film because it was somehow immoral. It was, of course, there was no such thing. It was perfectly reasonable, no nudity, no excessive bad language, nothing like that. It was they did not like the message, which part of it had to do with the film, that Black America was, the protest was fading away as a viable means of advancement, and that whether one agrees with that or one doesn't agree with that, it ought to be something that Americans consider and think about for a moment. But Amazon felt that they were somehow so morally superior to that option, that option of that they were so wonderful. In other words, they could simply cancel it and move on and thereby do a good service to American life. So in that sense, evil is dressed up as good, and in cancellation, that seems to me to be the formula.
Yeah, I think that all of these companies set such a dangerous precedent when they began doing these things, when they started making political judgments and boycotting different things based on, sort of a moral decision, as you point out. So now they find themselves, where they have to respond to everything. And they put themselves in a box. They're going to alienate, obviously, a lot of their customers. We put, the very big names up on the screen. Let's put this up on the screen. This is an interesting comparison of the donations to the Trump campaign and to the Biden campaign by Alphabet, which is Google, and Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook. You can see that a tremendous disparity. Google, $4.3 million to the Biden campaign, $106,000 to Trump. Microsoft, $2.3 million, and you can see the Trump comparison at $247,000. So it's obviously a striking difference, not surprising, really, in that point. But, it's, I want to ask you about sort of, because we've talked a lot about the changing look from some African Americans at, sort of which party actually does really deserve their vote and has done the most to help these communities over time. And I know that you felt that President Trump had done a lot of good things for the Black community. So where does that energy go now?
Well, I think I would not say that Donald Trump was the most sophisticated American when it comes to the complex issue of race. What I will say, though, is that he made room for, made space for us to look at this complex issue from another angle. We have been in a paradigm for 60 years now, since the 60s, of racial protest, and then, of course, always following protest, inevitably, dependency. The people we're protesting, we're asking them to lift us up and take us forward. Donald Trump made space for another point of view, which is that dependency and protest are obsolete. They've taken Black America as far as they can take us. That now we have to look at a model, a paradigm that is based more on individual responsibility, on self-help, moving our...
And how to jumpstart.
Beautiful kitchen.
So we look forward to those discussions to make sure that all law enforcement have the resources they need for critical events.
Madam Mayor, before January 6th, had you received any specific intelligence briefs from the FBI or DHS that indicated we would see the kind of violence we did that day?
I didn't, and I think it has been much discussed that the real threat that people would actually be violent and siege the Capitol was underappreciated by all of our intelligence organizations.
I guess the question is, if that intelligence didn't make it to you back then, are you confident that the intelligence you're getting before the inauguration will keep the city secure?
Well, I think that, yes, I'm more confident with every hour that the system, the kind of the structure of how this event is supported is strong. It's been in place for every inauguration, and I've asked all of our federal partners to step it up in light of the January 6th attacks on the Capitol, but also in light of the spread of the threat across the country. It is requiring a national approach to supporting the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
It is nightly news for this Monday. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other.
Tonight.
Going to be a mild evening across KELOland. Right now, we are in the 30s with a westerly breeze, and tomorrow is going to be a really warm day.
About their votes on this issue, are some of them also in the position that you are in terms of this impeachment vote, do you believe?
I don't want to share any private discussions. This is obviously something that a lot of us are trying to understand. If you can imagine, the past week we went from grappling with the electoral, college certification, which we knew was going to be a very severe, test of whether or not we were more concerned about our political futures or kind of our moral compass, and then moving forward. We had the events of Wednesday, and we're still dealing with the aftermaths and the fallout of that. So, I can only say that this is something that we are actively discussing. And as I said earlier, there are folks doubting the timing, curious about the process, concerned about the ramifications, but I've heard no doubt on the merits.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your honesty and your willingness to speak out about it. Congressman Meyer, I think it's really important, and I thank you.
Thank you.
And after this, some more breaking news. More than a dozen Capitol Police officers are now under investigation.
Fatigue and headache. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your
go-to outlet has been just completely snuffed out. Special report ahead. And coronavirus overwhelming hospitals across the country. We're going to go to one where they are treating hot patients in the hallways, in the gift shop, and in the prayer room.
Sharing.
Detroit to Dallas and San Diego, sports stadiums, convention halls, and other sites became inoculation centers. But in Arlington, Texas, Governor Greg Abbott said the biggest problem is that they need more doses to do the job.
We have the structure to vaccinate Texans very swiftly. This structure that we now have created can be expanded and will be expanded very swiftly across the state. The only limitation that we now face is the limitation of supply.
Meanwhile, in Chicago, 6,000 students resumed in-person learning in public schools. The teachers' union opposed the move, citing safety concerns. Israel announced today that it's moving forward with plans for 800 new settler homes in the occupied West Bank. The news from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office could create tensions with the U.S. President-elect Biden has opposed settlement expansion. Cuba is back on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo charged today that Cuba is still harboring U.S. fugitives and supporting Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro. President Obama took Cuba off the terror list in his moves to normalize relations. President Trump has awarded the Medal of Freedom to another staunch supporter of his. He's Congressman Jim Jordan. The Ohio Republican was part of Mr. Trump's defense team at his Senate impeachment trial last year. The Medal of Freedom is the nation's highest civilian honor. And on Wall Street, stocks cooled off a bit after setting records last week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 89 points to close at 31,008. The Nat
warmer during the day and getting below freezing for the most part at night, but then some things will be changing later on this week. But look at highs across the area today. We're supposed to be in the 20s on the 11th of January. We were in the 30s and 40s today over the Dakota News Now coverage area, 50s across portions of western South Dakota. Let's look ahead to tomorrow. We'll have 20s in the morning, so again below freezing, but then we'll warm right back up into the 40s, even some 50s across portions of the area tomorrow with a good amount of sunshine. There'll be a few clouds around, and also a plus is there's not going to be much wind. Here's tomorrow morning. Let's take you through the afternoon. That wind, generally speaking, about 5 to 10 miles an hour through the day into tomorrow evening, but the wind is going to be a big factor later on this week. Details on that coming up in a few minutes.
Thanks, Phil. Okay. A Dakota News Now follow-up here at 6. 2 people have been arrested in connection with a deadly shooting in Mitchell. Police say Jose Acevedo and Luis Perez Melendez face second-degree murder charges. The charges stem from an incident that happened Saturday night at the 500 block of North Main Street. Police say when they arrived on scene, they found the victim in the hallway with multiple gunshot wounds. They were pronounced dead at the scene. At this time, police have not identified the victim and say the investigation continues.
South Dakota continues to see an uptick in active COVID-19 cases. The state announcing 181 additional cases earlier today and 119 new recoveries. The state's active case count increasing to just over 5,100. The number of people hospitalized currently sits at 242. Officials say just over 550 people were tested, with nearly 33% of those individuals coming back positive. At this time, over 45,600 doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have been administered in the state. In Minnesota, health officials are saying that 980 new COVID-19 cases were reported, 4 additional deaths also to tell you about. The state says nearly 16,000 tests were processed, dropping the positivity rate to 7.3%. Meanwhile, 425 COVID-19 cases announced in Iowa. Officials say 556 residents are considered recovered, with 555 currently hospitalized. Iowa's active case count now sitting at nearly 36,600.
Today, the U.S. House is launching a 2-pronged effort to remove President Trump from office before January 20th, while giving Vice President Pence a long-shot ultimatum to invoke the 25th Amendment by tomorrow. Democrats are also fast-tracking the impeachment process, as Republicans are being forced to weigh the price of political loyalty. Alice Barr is in Washington and continues our coverage.
As more shocking images and accounts emerge from last week's siege on the Capitol, pressure is mounting to hold President Trump accountable for his role in inciting the deadly violence. Today, back in the building where they were attacked by a pro-Trump mob, House Democrats formally introduced one article of impeachment, incitement of insurrection.
We cannot simply let this go, because we can never heal as a nation if we don't have justice first.
It comes after Republicans sidelined a resolution calling on Vice President Mike Pence to replace the president under the 25th Amendment.
I object.
Sources familiar tell NBC News the vice president is unlikely to act, increasing the emphasis on impeachment with a vote as early as Wednesday. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she has the votes to impeach, writing, quote, "The president's threat to America is urgent, and so too will be our action," and telling CBS's 60 Minutes.
He has done something so serious that there should be prosecution against him.
Beyond impeachment, Democrats hope to block President Trump from ever holding public office again, but they're hoping for bipartisan support with only a few Republican backers so far.
I actually do believe that the president has disqualified himself.
The Republican-controlled Senate is in recess until January 19th, the day before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. All 100 senators would have to agree to come back early, and that's unlikely to happen, setting up the possibility of an impeachment trial after President Trump has already left office. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
ABC News is reporting that starting this week and running through at least Inauguration Day, armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals in the U.S. Capitol. That is according to an internal FBI bulletin obtained by ABC News. Federal law enforcement officials have advised police agencies to increase their security at state houses across the country following the riot at the U.S. Capitol. The spokesperson for the South Dakota Department of Public Safety issued a statement saying, quote, "Per highway patrol policy, we do not discuss security measures. You may see more highway personnel at the Capitol starting tomorrow when the legislative session starts. That is standard procedure."
The development at Foundation Park continues to grow. CJ Foods announced plans to build a new 700,000 square foot production facility in Sioux Falls. The Asian food production facility will employ 600 full-time workers by 2025. The new building will include production lines, a warehouse, distribution center, and office space. The products made at the facility will be distributed by the company and Schwann's. Well, shakeups in the social media world. One platform has been taken offline by its service provider, while another sees their stock drop following their actions against President Trump. We'll have those stories in about 14 minutes.
And we had a nice start to the work week. It's going to get even better for Tuesday and Wednesday.
Networks online, and most of the recent terrorist violence we've seen comes in from that.
Claims to asbestos victims. You may be
very different trajectory for the people who've been a part of this White House and this particular presidency.
Yeah, I think insurrectionist and a participant in an attempted coup against the United States doesn't really work on the resume. That doesn't really sell. It doesn't really sell. So we'll see how things wind up. Philip Rucker, Michael Cohen, thank you guys very much. Be safe out there. Up next. Last week's riot on Capitol Hill was an example of America repeating history over and over again. We'll be right back.
Is keeping, I think, many found us trying to understand who was there that day. I think part of what's so concerning is the vision of men like Eric Munchell and Lieutenant Colonel retired Brock, there with handcuffs, there with a military bearing and equipment. We really need to understand who these men were and what their plans were on that day. And I'm just very concerned that they have plans for the future.
So, you mentioned Larry Brock, who was the he had white flex cuffs, wore a helmet on the Senate floor. Alex showed his picture, we'll show it again. There are those cuffs. He's a retired Air Force Reserve officer. The man with the horns that everybody knows, everybody's seen that picture, horns and face paint, he's a Navy veteran. Do you think we're going to see more people who fit those profiles?
Yeah, I'm up to my eyeballs in footage and photos, and I know a lot of us are. And what we're seeing again and again is men and some women with a military bearing who are wearing the right gear, carrying it right in the right ways. And this really concerns me. Part of what's so concerning, I think, is that many of them seem to have come from the moment of the 6th, not worried about dishonor, but rather thinking, you know what, this worked. We should come back again, this time with weapons.
Wow, and that's your perception of what they're thinking.
Well, I think that that's not just my perception. I think if you go to the places where conservatives on the extreme are talking, it's hard even sometimes to describe them as conservatives, you see calls for armed violence. You see calls for the execution of Nancy Pelosi. You see graphics of Washington, D.C. ringed by rifles with calls to bring weapons to D.C. in the coming weeks. It's not just a hypothetical. It isn't a supposition. This is the messaging that we're seeing out there. What concerns me is that very quickly we've seen a whole set of conservative sites like Parler effectively turned off. On the one hand, that probably is going to reduce some of the enthusiasm, but I'm very concerned about the lone wolves and militia types who already know each other and who may already have a plan. They're still going to keep communicating. It's just going to be harder for researchers like me to find them.
John, thank you very much, and for that warning as well. I want everyone to know in just a couple minutes, we have a piece to exactly your point, right? When Parler shut down, where have these voices gone? And I want everyone to stay for that because it is such a crucial question. And all of this comes, of course, these threats, as the Department of Homeland Security has lost its acting chief. He's stepping down. The third member of President Trump's cabinet to step down following the insurrection that Trump helped incite last week. Out front now, Lawrence Tribe, constitutional law professor at Harvard Law School.
Kevin Kruger, president of the Student Affairs Association, says while online learning is not a new concept, experiencing it now raises psychological concerns.
The pandemic has amplified and increased those mental health issues.
A recent study conducted by the association found that 1 in 5 students report they are constantly anxious about the pandemic. They are also spending less time sleeping and exercising compared to the spring. Carolyn Berger from the University of Minnesota says online learning may be socially draining to some because they are no longer able to interact in person with their classmates.
They're not just whining. It really truly is extremely isolating for them.
Berger says students can help themselves by establishing a daily routine. Something as simple as setting an alarm and getting up at the same time each day can help combat the psychological effects of remote learning. With 2 COVID vaccines already rolled out and others in the pipeline, universities are hoping campuses can return to some type of normalcy soon. In Washington, I'm Jillian Angeline.
We are enjoying some warm weather right now. Phil says that things are going to change up as we progress through the week in his first alert forecast.
Long run of lynching throughout American history, but at this newly revolutionary goal, which is armed revolution against the state and mass attacks on American civilians. We're talking about a terror movement here that now represents the largest threat to Americans from terrorism, according to the DHS, the largest terrorist threat, more than what our president would call, quote unquote, Antifa and the left, more than radical Islamist terror. White supremacist extremism is the most significant terror threat to our nation, according to the DHS. And we're talking about the group that is responsible for the Oklahoma bombing, untold infrastructure attacks, assassinations, the list goes on and on and on. And it's a problem we haven't solved because of our deep history of racial injustice.
Well, indeed, and our refusal to talk about white people as terrorists and not willing to cross that line and have that conversation, but we did it tonight. Kathleen Ballou, Nicole Hannah-Jones, thank you both so much. That is tonight's Read Out. All In with Chris A starts now.
Tiny pinpoint.
We did it for one reason. We are totally opposed to political violence. We said that virtually every night for the past 6 months since the riots that began on Memorial Day. We meant it then, we mean it now. Every person who broke the law last Wednesday should be prosecuted. Vandalize a building, hurt a cop, go to jail. That's our position. That has always been our position. This show is for law and order, period. Many of those currently in power are not. They believe instead in selective enforcement. Selective enforcement is not law and order. It is the opposite. Laws must be applied equally to every citizen, or else they are not laws. They are the whims of a tyrant. Punish the guilty, spare the innocent. That is the most basic definition of justice, but that is not what's happening now. The crackdown on civil liberties we've watched over the past 5 days amounts instead to collective punishment. People who had nothing to do with the violence in the U.S. Capitol are being punished for that violence. And that is repugnant and immoral and anti-American. It should shock our sensibilities. It shocks Alexei Navalny. Navalny is the Russian dissident who was poisoned last year, apparently by the Putin government. He's watched the recent crackdown in this country by Joe Biden and his allies in big business and big tech with growing concern and then horror. Here's his conclusion, quote, We have seen many examples in Russia and in China of such private companies becoming the state's best friends and enablers when it comes to censorship. This precedent will be exploited by the enemies of freedom of speech around the world, end quote. So even in Russia, they know what's happening here is dangerous and it's wrong, because it is. In the past 5 days, PayPal, which keep in mind is supposed to be a payment processor, not a political party or a law enforcement agency, PayPal suspended the account of a group that paid for Trump supporters to travel to Washington last week. Now, it's not clear that any of these people participated in illegal acts. We do not know. But they were shut down anyway for their political views. It's not an isolated case. It's happening all over. It happened to performer Ariel Pink. Pink made the mistake of listening to the president's address on Wednesday. Pink says he didn't get anywhere near the Capitol. He went to his hotel and fell asleep. And no one has suggested otherwise. But for the crime of attending a political rally, Pink was punished. He was promptly dropped from his record label. He's done. Now it's possible he might not be able to fly on airplanes. A flight attendants union has demanded banning all, quote, insurrectionists from flying commercially anywhere in the United States. So the question is, and everything hangs on this definition, what's an insurrectionist? Well, according to a letter from Democrats in Congress, it is anyone who sympathizes with what happened on Wednesday. Think about that. Now, you can oppose what happened at the Capitol, and for the 15th time, we do oppose it loudly, have, and will. And you can still see this development for what it is. It's terrifying lunacy. But no one is pushing back against it. Instead, the biggest corporations in this country, the ones that control your checking account, the ones that control your health care, whether you live or die, have decided to radically expand the definition of what is now illegal. Insurrection, according to this new definition, means questioning any part of last November's election. So you thought that your birthright as an American was the right to ask questions, but not anymore. That's now a crime. Consider this, among many examples. A total of 139 Republicans in the House of Representatives objected to the certification of Joe Biden's victory. They were joined by several Republicans in the Senate. They called instead for an audit of the election results. Now, here's what they didn't do. They did not urge anyone to commit violence. They did not support the people who stormed the Capitol building. For our part, we did not promote their cause on this show. We had mixed feelings about it. On the other hand, we didn't denounce them as insurrectionists because they weren't and they aren't. Except now they are. And that definition has huge consequences, not just for them, but for the country.
So, let's have trial by combat.
Today, the New York Bar Association said it's now looking into the possibility of expelling Giuliani because lawyers aren't supposed to incite mob violence. Bar associations have more teeth, it seems, than senators from Florida. But arguments against holding the president accountable get even weaker than Senator Rubio's. Remember, after the first impeachment, when Senator Susan Collins said that the president had learned his lesson and was unlikely to misbehave again, that didn't hold up so well, did it? Well, imagine saying nearly the exact same thing only yesterday.
Personal view is that the president touched the hot stove on Wednesday and is unlikely to touch it again. And if that's the case, I think we get every day we get closer to the last day of his presidency. We should be thinking more about the first day of the next presidency than the last day of his presidency.
Look forward, not back, says the senator who once pronounced himself, quote, deeply troubled by the long-delayed bipartisan and authoritative report on the Benghazi attacks. Back then, he vowed to, quote, continue working with my colleagues to uncover the facts. But as far as an attack on the Capitol, fomented by the president, don't worry. He's just a child who touched a hot stove, and he won't do it again. I'm sure about that. In fact, at the moment, some of his fellow Republicans are now talking like the real assault on democracy. The real threat comes not from armed right-wing mobs or a president who enables them, but instead from the social media platforms that no longer want anything to do with them.
Unfortunately, it's far worse than what I could even imagine. The effect of this is that there is no longer a free and open social media company or site for any American to get on any longer. Because these big companies, Apple, Amazon, Google, they have just destroyed what was likely, Parler is likely $1 billion company. Poof, it's gone.
Well, until the PGA took the president's tournament away, getting bounced from Twitter was said to be the president's big grievance in the wake of Wednesday's attack. Which is odd because it's not like he's been muzzled or anything, he does have a briefing room right in his house. How many of us can say that? So if the president wants to get a message out, whether about a grave national tragedy like an attack on democracy, or a personal one like losing a golf tournament, you can just walk downstairs, turn on the lights, and have at it. Meantime, CNN's Mona Rogers is reporting that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy indicated to his Republican colleagues that the president bears some of the blame for Wednesday. What's more, Mona's source says McCarthy also said that Trump acknowledged to him that he, meaning the president, bore some responsibility for the attack, or the riot. With us now, Ohio's Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. Senator Brown, how believable is it, in your view, that President Trump acknowledged to Congressman McCarthy that he bore some responsibility for what happened? I mean, beyond the fact that the president hasn't done this publicly, it would also, I guess, jeopardize his legal exposure in all of this.
After 3 years and 355 days, we're going to start, and not to mention his business past, his past as a private businessman, we're going to believe that he's going to take responsibility for something and acknowledge anything that's his fault. And when he won't even say it, of course, we don't believe it. That
is the fact that all of these people, from Donald Trump at the very top down to the guy in that video with a gas mask on his head, they were all working towards the same end. After an election in which more than 156 million Americans voted, a record, and 7 million more people voted for Joe Biden than Donald Trump, and he got more than 270 electoral votes, making him the rightfully elected leader of the United States. All of those people, from Donald Trump on down to the guy in the gas mask, they were all together trying to do the same thing. They were trying to install the defeated man as the head of our government against the will of the American people via any means necessary. That is the project in which all of them were engaged, including a lot of prominent Republicans and conservative activists, from Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk, who tweeted about sending 80 busloads of people to the Capitol on January 6th and later deleted that tweet, to Texas Congressman Pete Sessions, who tweeted on January 3rd about encouraging people from Stop the Steal to keep fighting, and that he was looking forward to doing his duty on January 6th. And a whole bunch of his colleagues, like Congressman Andy Biggs, and Paul Gosar of Arizona, and Kevin Brady of Texas, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and Rick Scott and John Kennedy, every last one of them, up to and including the president, and the people around him, have engaged in the same plot in the open to seize power for the man who lost, the man that was repudiated by American voters and American democracy. And for all the talk about 1776 and the Don't Tread on Me Gadsden flags, it is those folks who are on the side of tyranny. They are on the side of a would-be crown. They are on the side of might over people power. They wanted to seize power from you, from us as democratic citizens. They wanted a small group of congressmen to take it away. That is what the Republican Party has now associated itself with, or in large part has become. Now, this country's been through trauma and disaster and war and civil war. And we have wrestled with treason and sedition and those who would seek to destroy American democracy, especially genuinely equitable, multiracial American democracy. We've fought those battles. The threat posed by these people, frankly, is as serious as anything we have seen, at least since then. If there is not accountability for it, they will try again and will have a better chance of succeeding. And if there is any doubt that all these pieces were all working together towards the same end, and keep in mind, the president wanted the mob to go to the Capitol. He told them to go there so they could intimidate Congress out of counting electoral votes for his opponent, so they could spook Mike Pence into stealing it for him. And then, after they stormed the Capitol in this violent attack, after the beatings of the cops, and came within minutes of possibly actually setting upon members of Congress themselves, and as they started to pick up the pieces with the blood still on the ground, this is what the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, was up to. This is Rudy Giuliani in a voicemail he left for Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, one of the president's most stalwart supporters, telling him to do whatever he can to further delay the counting of electoral votes.
Senator Tuberville, or I should say Coach Tuberville, this is Rudy Giuliani, president's lawyer. I'm calling you because I want to discuss with you how they're trying to rush this hearing and how we need you, our Republican friends, to try to just slow it down so we can get these legislatures to get more information to you. And I know they're reconvening at 8 tonight. But the only strategy we can follow is to object to numerous states and raise issues so that we get ourselves into tomorrow, ideally until the end of tomorrow.
Take a listen to think about what you just heard. The president's own lawyer. This is after the siege of the Capitol, after it's overrun, after they're cowering in a secure room so they don't get torn to shreds by the lynch mob, and they're reconvening to go do their constitutional duty. Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, after all that, is calling, and he wants the Alabama senator to do whatever he can to pick up the baton from the mob. The mob did its job. It delayed things. Now you use your position as a U.S. senator to stop the peaceful transfer of power and the lawful recognition of the democratically elected president. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas has been at the forefront of discussions about impeaching the president, both the first time around and now. She's a member of the House Judiciary Committee who just introduced her own impeachment resolution, and Congresswoman Jackson Lee joins me now. Congresswoman, my understanding is there was a long call with the Speaker today, 3 hours, I believe, to talk about this week. What can you tell us about the sentiment in the caucus right now?
One thing that we do know for sure, that the President of the United States, Chris, is a clear and present danger to the United States of America and to the people of the United States. And while he has been fueling the fires of domestic terrorists, it is tragic that close to 4,000 people every day are dying of COVID-19. Again, a dereliction of his duty. We realize that he must be removed immediately. And as we come together on the impeachment resolutions and debate it on this coming Wednesday, we will take a vote to remove this president by way of impeachment as quickly as we can. And let me just say this. I want to remind Americans of those senators, Republicans, who after we worked so hard, documented so much in the impeachment proceeding earlier in the last year, I heard individuals say, I could not vote to convict because I truly believe he has learned a lesson. What are they thinking now when 6 people are dead because of his provoking and stoking the fires of violence and domestic terrorism? 6 people are dead, including 2 of our precious Capitol Hill police officers.
Where have you heard anything along the lines of contrition or self-reflection from Republicans in the House? I've seen a lot of Republicans fan out over the last few days, intent on changing the topic or just glossing over it. They are very focused on how many Twitter followers they have. As you said, as 3,000 plus Americans die every day, as we put the pieces together on this violence that was beset upon the Capitol. Is there anyone in the Republican Party talking about the accountability needed at this moment before we can talk about unity?
You know, Chris, I was one of those in the gallery, of course, and having been in the Capitol during 9/11, I might just say that this was probably the most frightening because I think in 9/11 we got out as quickly as we could. In this instance, we were cowering as the not in shame and not because we were fearful so much that we couldn't function, but we were told to bend as much as we could because they were ramming the House, and because of the bravery of plainclothes officers with guns drawn, they never penetrated the floor of the House of Representatives. I would think after we broke and went into an undisclosed place and people had time to reflect that we would hear more Republicans. I have heard some, but I've not heard any to date, and I hope that we will join us on Wednesday to vote for the impeachment resolution. That's the quiet reflection that we need. But you know what, Chris, we need more than quiet reflection. These are many of their constituents that are now planning to storm this seat of democracy, this sacred place again. I'd like to hear some Republicans taking to the public space, the public sphere, and be able to say, calm these individuals, seek their higher standing, their affection for the flag, their affection for democracy, their understanding that this nation stands for justice, for all and equality for all. That's what we need to hear in order to safeguard this country, in order to respond to more of the American people who frankly have been bombarding our emails, our texts by saying they are appalled, they're frightened. They want this nation to be united, and they want this nation to have respect and dignity to be maintained for this place of democracy and for our desires to be utilized on the floor of the House and Senate. That's where we debate and show our disagreement, not with mobs and terrorists raiding through, tearing up precious items, and seeking to attack members of Congress, to kill our speaker and to kill the Vice President of the United States. Can any Republican with a group of them join in and take to a podium and ask for peace? I will join them on that podium. Can we do that together?
Just waiting. Who's going to be next? Dumping us. Everybody. The last thing we have right now is email, and I bet you within 24 hours our email will be shut off too.
I just got to ask you, because I think this is a referendum on American society and where we are and where we're going. The left used to stand up for civil liberties. The famously moderate Joe Manchin approves of this. Apart from Glenn Greenwald and Michael Tracy, God bless them both, I haven't seen any liberal stand up to say, wow, this is really scary. Have you?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've seen a lot of people say that this is scary, but I've also seen a lot of people who are participating in the 5 minutes of hate and kind of egging it on and cheering, and it's disgusting. People threatening my life. I can't go home tonight. So this is really a lot. You know, this is not just, you know, our civil liberties. They can shut down $1 billion company, $500 million to $1 billion company. That's what we were getting valuations at overnight.
Are you going to be back up soon?
We will be back up eventually because we're not going to give up. But soon is difficult, you know. I thought immediately, oh, no problem. We'll call up a new vendor, right? We call up the vendor. We're all good to go. And then right at the last second, sorry, somebody said something we can't host you by. And it's been that one after another ever since then. Right at the last minute, they just bail. So we're going to do it. We're going to be back online one day, and hopefully soon, as soon as possible. But this is a real challenge. We have to build our own infrastructure, our own everything in order to do it.
Pirate radio, digital pirate radio, dark web. I hope so. I hope we're out of time. I hope, John, you'll come back. You will come back with a list of every corporate coward who bowed to pressure to silence you and 7 million other people on Parler.
You can bet I will. And no, almost 20 million people now. Almost 20 million. And yes, I will.
Yeah, I won't forget this day. Great to see you, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Judge Jeanine Pirro is the host of Justice with Judge Jeanine on the Fox News channel. She joins us with Riot.
Actually calling for his head. And, you know, the point that the vice president has been trying to make over the past, I don't know, week, since last Wednesday when he finally put out a statement saying that he would support the Constitution and not the illegal action that the president wanted him to take and not accepting the Electoral College results, that, you know, what you did was wrong. Now, obviously, Mike Pence feels that he was in the right and over the last week, and history will prove that to be the case. But he also is somebody who is a young Republican with ambition, and he knows better than anybody that this is still Donald Trump's Republican Party. So as, you know, kind of heroic as he was, if people want to say that, remember the Mike Pence over the last 4 years who has been loyal, unflinchingly loyal, despite the fact that he learned, as everybody else did beforehand, that's a one-way street.
Well, I mean, it is incredible, Dana, when you think that while Mike Pence was being hidden at an undisclosed location in the Capitol with his wife, I believe, the president was tweeting against him while there was a mob searching to hang him.
It's unbelievable. And the fact that, I mean, listen, politics is politics, but just on a human level, the notion, according to Jim's reporting, that the vice president wants to make things right in their relationship, you know, most people would do their best to make sure that things stay very wrong in their relationship because it is Donald Trump. that was the one who did the wrong in so many ways, not the least of which, as you said, abandoning him and ignoring him when he was clearly in peril.
I mean, the idea that anybody would think that Donald Trump would be thinking about them in the midst of crisis it surprises me after what we've all learned. John, George Conway recently tweeted that what we saw at the Capitol last week was President Trump's August 1974, and the erection he fomented was his smoking gun tape. As you well know, in August 74, Republicans actually did something after President Nixon's smoking gun tape surfaced. From what we're seeing so far, is there any reason to think they're going to do something now?
There is not yet. We can always be hopeful that they will get the spine to go down and tell the president that he really should resign, or they can speak through their processes by, first in the House, a significant number of Republicans joining in an article of impeachment. If there is some sympathy in the Senate, they've got lots of ways that they can express it, and that would send a message to him. You know, the polling so far shows that while he had 74 million votes in this last election, a lot of those people no longer support him as a result of these activities that have happened on the Hill and his encouragement to ignore the vote, if you will. So I don't know that he does have that solid support. They're trying to measure that. They're politicians. They're looking at their career and their future. But if they would just do the right thing, that always is the best solution to deal with these problems.
Yeah. John Dean, appreciate it. Dana Bash, thanks very much. Next, what the FBI knows and what it wants the public to know about potential violence in the run-up to Inauguration Day. Later, the government's former cybersecurity chief on sifting through the online clues to prevent another deadly attack.
To veteran spouses everywhere, we salute for the life of your family.
Fighting for there to be a permanent insurrection in this country that will plague the Biden presidency for the next 4 years.
Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, it's always good to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Next up, the nationwide search for those insurrectionists. I'll talk to one man whose crowdsourced efforts on social media have already led to positive.
There's no Gold Bond, championing your skin.